Welcome to an kind of extraordinary, as usually easy set podcast and meeting discussion with David Bisset. It is the second one which the Bridge of Friendship does and is further distributed by Cross Border Talks. And it is again a discussion or a promise for discussion which comes as a reflection of what's going on around in the world and possibly with somehow um, socially social theory savvy mind, which I hope he has and which I hope I won't prevent from being from showing its uh, insights. Um, the occasion for this talk is, as usual, something which David posted. David Bisset is a Scottishman who has been living in Bulgaria for decades, and he has been active in the NGO and social services sector. He has also had experience in university domain and has been an authoritative voice on the so-called deinstitutionalization reform in Bulgarian and other social services in the region. So I presume, even if I have not asked him directly, but I presume he is very well familiar with what liberal, humanist, um, let's say NGO in short, values and mindset represents. And I think it's important to discuss namely with him because it was from one of his posts that I got the message that what is happening now in the world with Trump renouncing on a number of post World War II policies and philosophy of the United States and generally of the West, I have the feeling that liberalism is somehow uh, dismantled or being reduced. And as I said, David Bisset had a certain post which I refer to that liberalism, something of the kind that liberalism was well intended, maybe just like socialism, it came with good purposes, with good intentions. It was strong philosophy, with a strong philosophy of human rights, human dignity, progress, um, perfectionability, but not or improvement, but not never reaching the state of perfectness. A number of assumptions about liberalism were promising also for intellectuals of my region after the fall of socialism. And at the end, a number of deviations appeared. This is also what David hinted in his post on Facebook. So liberalism um, might be in a state of need for renewal or at least consideration of what went wrong. And here I think our talk could start indeed with perhaps a very general question, but after that we may go more concretely into issues, namely what was the liberal promise or contribution, the way you have felt it and have believed maybe in it, and what went wrong as you now, as we are now in a situation where world is being redrawn in some way, and maybe some truths could be said more openly.
Okay, Vladimir, I'm sitting here with a book on my desk that I'm now reading for the second time. The author is Geert Mak. He's a historian and journalist from the Netherlands, from Holland. And the book is called The Dream of Europe, and the subtitle is Travels in a Troubled Continent. It's an extraordinary book. because he charts the unfolding of the European dream in the post-war period, and then starts to question or try to analyse how the dream of this united Europe started to unravel, started to come apart at the seams. It's quite a moving book as well, because he does undertake these travels throughout the European continent. They span several decades. Meets with people ranging from intellectuals, fellow journalists, villagers in Bosnia, Iranian immigrants in the suburbs of Copenhagen, and pieces together the impact of this unravelling of the European dream on their lives. It's quite a moving book in some ways. And I realise it spans the period of my professional life, from when I left university to the present day. I mean, the idea behind the formation of the European community was, well, it was rooted in the fact that there had been 2 world wars in the 20th century, and people were virtually saying, never again, this must never happen in the European continent again. We have to create structures that prevent this happening. We have to work together and create a unity among the various countries, understanding that some of the borders of those countries had been drawn quite arbitrarily in the late 19th and early 20th century, understanding that cultures actually span cross-border regions, and understanding that there were certain frictions arising out of the formation of these new nation states. But the main principle was war should never again happen on this continent. And this means in the early days, the emphasis was on a sort of humanitarian style of politics, humanitarian style of social governance, with great emphasis on social welfare, employee rights, the standard of living in families in the various member countries. But then something started to go wrong. In fact, there was a war that took place in the European continent, and it ended up in the disintegration of the country that was once Yugoslavia. And it became very clear that the European authorities were not well equipped to deal with this war, and inevitably the United States intervened in the end. There have been cataclysmic events both within Europe and outside Europe, like, for instance, the Iraq War, or the 9/11 catastrophe in the United States, the 2008 economic collapse, financial crisis. But these inevitably have made a major contribution to the evolution of liberalism during this period of 30, 40 decades. But I remember as a young man in the 1980s, when I was working in London, after university, I joined the accountancy profession. I don't know why I did that, because I didn't enjoy it. But I eventually moved more towards management consultancy, which was a discipline that was in its infancy in those days, and working in the area of organizational psychology, this type of thing. And I remember I was starting to see signs of something I didn't like. But as a young man, and in those early days, I couldn't quite articulate what it was. I couldn't put my finger on what it was I was seeing. But now looking back, I remember a time when the organisation I worked for was asked to assist with the process of professionalisation of public administration. And the preliminary focus was on certain boroughs within the region of Greater London. And we were asked to take part in this project to provide consultancy and support. But eventually we withdrew because we didn't particularly like what we were seeing. It gave us a bad taste in our mouths, as we say in the West, because this professionalisation seemed to entail an attempt to attract young new graduates into the sphere of public administration, graduates who were ostensibly held relevant qualifications, and these youngsters would be fast-tracked into senior positions. They would make their way through the system at quite a rapid rate. We recognised that this had the effect of devaluing what was there already and devaluing the principles of working in public administration, where the emphasis had been on starting at the lower rungs and then working your way up through the organisation, all the time accumulating experience. And we felt that this experience, this longevity experience of existing employees and their maturity was being devalued and swallowed up in this attempt to professionalise public administration. And we wondered where this was going to lead. And indeed, along came Margaret Thatcher, who placed great emphasis on what she called small government, which was a mission then picked up by the Labour government that came in that replaced the Thatcher government under Tony Blair. Small government. They didn't believe in big government. They wanted to pare back government departments. And this was accompanied by an emphasis on privatisation of public utilities, like the utility companies, electricity, water, the railway in Britain. This was how it started, in the belief that competition would be good and would improve the efficiency and the procurement processes and everything in these various fields. And this grew and grew and grew. So eventually we saw corporations involved in all sorts of areas of public life in Britain. And then it started to happen elsewhere, particularly in the Netherlands, France, Germany, elsewhere. So you had corporations running health administration, you had corporations involved in education. We now have public schools that are run by corporations in Britain. We have corporations involved in the provision of social services, disability care, childcare, and it just proliferated and proliferated. And this meant that the vocabulary and the principles in these areas started to change over time. We started hearing expressions like people were no longer departmental heads, they were chief executives now. People started talking in terms of return on investment and cost efficiency and these types of issues. And also what we tended to see that many of these government departments became more and more dependent, having been hollowed out, became more and more dependent on external consultancy, primarily from the members of the big six consultancy firms. So in the European context, that would probably be Deloitte's and PricewaterhouseCoopers, which created obvious questions about public accountability, because these were out with the sphere of government, but nevertheless played a major part in determining how government departments operated. it created questions about conflicts of interest. And you would hear stories about someone from one of the big accountancy firms, PricewaterhouseCoopers, say, advising government ministers on their tax policy in the morning, and then in the afternoon, advising their wealthy corporate clients on tax avoidance schemes. Massive conflict of interest. So over time, what was happening was that the public administration, the old government departments, the old civil service, the old establishment was being hollowed out and rapidly losing its competence in the management of its old spheres of operation, and becoming increasingly dependent on external consultants, corporations, think tanks, research bodies out with the sphere of government. Additionally, what seemed to happen is that this gradually grew into a sort of stratum above society, a sort of intermittent layer between government and society, this stratum of what we might call the managerial class or the administrative class that just seemed to grow and grow. And we started to see a proliferation of what the social anthropologist Dave Graeber called bullshit jobs that were in service of the system. So a chief executive in health administration would need a specialist assistant. We would then need another specialist assistant, another specialist assistant, another specialist assistant. And you saw this proliferation of these people specializing in very narrow ranges of specialization, micro-specialization, and performing exclusively procedures that the previous incumbents in government departments would take for granted, would just do an ordinary part of their job, another ordinary part of their day-to-day working life. So you saw this growth in what we call the management class, and you started to realise that this management class was becoming profoundly self-serving. So what was happening is that somebody who previously occupied a bullshit job, they come out of university at the age of 27, 28 with a relevant qualification, calling themselves masters of business administration or public administration. How can you be a master of anything at the age of 27 when you've never had a previous job, you've never done any work in your life? So this demonstrated that there was this new belief in instant expertise instead of the idea of developing mastery in your role over an extensive period of time. So that this caused a tragic erosion of the competence base just below government. But nevertheless, members of this management class saw themselves as the ideal candidates to become government ministers. So you had this callow, superficial system replacing what was once there, the old establishment, which was more to do with longevity of experience, life experience, maturity, competence. And I think over time it's created this situation whereby the public just lost all confidence in government in the West. And it has, more than these cataclysmic events that I've mentioned, it has contributed radically to the erosion of governance in European context and additionally in the American context. Just this erosion of the competence base. And it's difficult to express my disappointment and my horror that this has been allowed to happen over the years. But that this is the basis on which the Western world, much of the Western world, is run now. We experience it here. I mean, you mentioned my experience in deinstitutionalization in Britain. This has been going on since practically 1991, the early 1990s, after Bulgaria and Romania entered the European Union. It's extended right across this period, and repeatedly we've seen consultants and advisors come from the West, and repeatedly highly experienced frontline workers in Bulgaria have been disappointed with the experience because they find that the standard of advice we're given is superficial. It seems to be a mixture of platitudes and very simplistic 5 or 7 point plans for the deinstitutionalization process to take place. Very, very simplistic plans on how to scale up efforts in improving childcare and family support in Bulgaria. So I feel that, and I wholeheartedly agree with the economist Mariana Mazzucato, who's talked about, I mean, in her book, The Big Con, has talked about the depletion of the competence base within government and its peripheries, and wholesale dependence on organisations who are both working for profit and, like I say, also have a substantial client base in the corporate world. So there is this conflict of interest. I don't know what the answer is, to be frank.
Okay, so as a result of this erosion of competence which you speak about, world and especially also world politics, but also politics in more peripheral zones like maybe Southeastern Europe, they're being reduced to what I think in Britain is called Punch and Judy show.
Yes, I've heard that
You know,
expression.
mainly meaning the way I understand this phrase, meaning that we have two dummies or puppets, which or more puppets maybe, but who just make short sketches of maybe vulgar phrases, and usually there is somebody hitting somebody, and the Balkan style of the way Balkan culture is seen maybe also has a little bit of that element which is contained in the word seir, which you might be maybe know as living in Bulgaria. Maybe some people here are very much okay with watching this Punch and Judy show on the TV every day, which is, I think, maybe it's not an exaggeration, because periodically we have situations in which, for example, in Bulgarian parliament, people are close to physical punching each other or even go for it. And I think it's clear that violence appears when there is lack of sense and, of course, lack of power. I remember some young people thinking that to say a swear word to somebody about some of his relatives is a sign of domination, a sign of power. I'm more of the opposite school. I have the feeling that people swear, especially in the Balkans. I don't know about other cultures, but here, because they're unable and they recognize their inability, and that is why they say this word, which is the swear word. And it, it was a little bit unexpected direction for me to go, because we very soon reached and took into observation both Western Britain and my region. But I'm curious about this whole reduction which we see. You spoke about loss or destruction of competence, and uh, there is even a situation in which maybe on many issues which require years of accumulation of knowledge, years of tests, years of even having social ground, social base, social environment in which you interact with people and reach certain awareness or knowledge or realization. There are many domains in which my region, for example, just can't produce real knowledge. I say that as somebody who is speaking Persian. I am aware of various reactions that stigmatize any Persian speaker, no matter whether uh, the Persian speaker approaches an Iranian or non-Iranian or Bulgarian, Romanian, etc. There are fields of knowledge where there is really lack of knowledge, lack of awareness, and to appear knowledge about them which is really illuminated true knowledge, knowledge of realization, is very difficult, also because there are no standards, clear standards. Usually uh, many discussions, that's also about in our social life, are reduced about who is whose man. And I, for example, can say that in Bulgaria there is this feeling that there are maybe 3 or 4 or 5 types of groups, political groups in society, and maybe people at a certain level, when you are not part from their in group, they're only interested who is your, let's say, master in a way, who is the leader. Are you with Radev? Are you with Pevsky? Are you with somebody else? Are you with Borisov, etc.? And you said that you don't have the answer. Um, Maybe certain talk should be made to find the answer about the reasons. And the way I think, uh, once again, I speak more about my region because my experience with Western Europe is much smaller. But I think there are a few factors which are creating problems, structural problems. They are not depending on even on a person. They are just like independently existing and creating problems. So one of these factors, I think, is that maybe it's any society, any modern society, but maybe especially capitalism in a way, is about hegemony. So and because it's based on competition, so people who are efficient are usually people who have resources, and uh, maybe with time it's much easier to be efficient even without doing any effort, just because you have resources and you can multiply them by the laws of capitalism. um, but that creates certain division in society between haves and haves nots, and stigmatizes people who might have potential and might deserve to flourish, but having no resources puts them in a situation in which they cannot compete. And this is maybe not honest to general to the equality and to justice in society. So also this issue of differences of resources create certain hegemonic attitude of certain institutions or people, or maybe some speak of oligarchs. Maybe there are different hierarchies in that, but in any case, there is hegemony obviously in society, uh, um, and to change this balance, one has to fight really a lot. I mean, has to be very determined and also self-aware. It's not an easy path. It can take years to change certain balances, maybe even within your family, which theoretically is well intended, but there are also hegemonical relations in the family, parents, children, etc. I don't say it's only one part that is hegemonic. It could be in different ways distributed, but I say that there are big issues with this uh, difference of might in people, and it's creating some issues for change in society, I think. uh, because for me at least, and I think that's logic for me, sounds logic to say that change in society usually means certain renewal, and it's linked also to life, because life is also a kind of renewal and, let's say, rebirth and renewal of our forces. Much like nature flourishes every spring, so power of life is related to renewal, and society should be also about successful renewal, which should be taking place, I think, more naturally and more in organic way, without big fuss and big conflicts. But I think I have the feeling that the more somebody goes to the periphery of international system, that's my point of view, of course, as a peripheral, more or less peripheral person, but the more one goes to the periphery, the more hegemony is getting strong. I really spoke a lot about this thing. It's not the only structural issue. Maybe it's also related to the level of speed and dynamism of our the identities, of our personalities, of our abilities to learn. Maybe there are many more issues, but I want to add to your when you make the diagnosis, let's say, of the problems which you observed. You spoke about corporate culture and a deviation from plans which were originally plans for social and humane society in Europe. Now I have the feeling that once that competition became the leading principle in the EU, which took place after the Delors reforms in the 90s, the result is this accumulation of hegemony. And I am adding to your diagnosis the issue of hegemony and inequality of power. And I'm curious how you see this issue, knowing you have experiences from different countries, not only UK or Bulgaria, but also UK and Bulgaria, but also other countries. So, um, how is this fitting into the picture of the problem of today's post-liberalism, if we may say, times?
Hmm. Uh, I'm just tossing some of the things that you said. I'm tossing them around in my head, Vladimir. Um, yes, what we tend to find nowadays, uh, post the 2008 financial crisis, post COVID, uh, is that many governments are now determined to try to balance their books, uh, and they're undertaking what we call austerity measures. And many, not only on the left, but many among the traditional middle classes, and even quite a number of commentators on the right are now starting to recognise that those who are bearing the burden of these austerity measures of governments tightening their belts are the dependent and vulnerable members of society. In order to save money, governments target the social welfare system and insist that it needs to be rendered more efficient, and levels of disability payments and sickness payments and these types of things that are being paid out need to be reviewed and only given to the most deserving. The underlying assumption being that there are many that are not deserving receiving these benefits. There's a determination that recipients of benefits should, insofar as it's possible, be returned to work. It's said that many simply don't want to work because they've discovered that they are more affluent receiving state benefits rather than joining what we call the precariat, which is this body of people, a significant number of people who, because of a lack of qualifications, because of their family situation, are dependent on what they call zero contract work, where they're critically exploited. If they need to take time off, they can find themselves penalised. If they become sick, they lose their source of income. It's certainly true that welfare systems in a number of European countries have broken and need radical review. But I think to too great an extent, many governments are hostages to those who do not approve of the welfare system. Hostages of people who look upon the poor and the needy as victims of their own laziness or inability to function as proper citizens. There's this widespread denigration of the poor, and most especially those members of that stratum of society whose families perhaps came from other countries, immigrant families. It sounds very simplistic to say that governments are working for the 1% or being held hostage by the 1%, but it cannot be argued against that over the last several decades, social inequality has increased markedly. And every time there's an effort whereby governments try to balance their books, it seems to be the poorer members of society that pay the most as a proportion of their very vulnerable incomes, or who suffer the most because the essential services are cut back and cut back and cut back. So it seems it's a question of priorities. And I think the skewing of these priorities demonstrate the extent to which governments are I'm loath to say willing to cast vast bodies of their citizens adrift. I'm loath to say they're indifferent to the plights of their citizens, but it's rather that they are too heavily in the grasp of big business and corporations. And too heavily dependent on the development of strategies devised by external consultancy firms, where social welfare is unlikely to be a major consideration. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about the emphasis on cost effectiveness and efficiency and return on investment, and uh, cutting costs. So to a very considerable extent, business and profit generation criteria have infected too many spheres of public life. And we're now trapped in this system, and undoing the damage that's been done is a considerable task. And government departments, having been hollowed out and having become dependent on external consultancy firms, corporate sponsorship, corporate support, corporate partnership, uh, haven't got the imagination or the resources to return to a system that is fairer from a social perspective, from the point of view of social justice.
Okay, so you keep seeing the source of problem in corporation, as I understand, or managerial class, or the general ethos of recent 3 or 4 decades. As a parenthesis to that, I'm aware that the UK is a place for a number of cooperation initiatives. For example, cooperation of consumers, I think, exist in UK.
Mm-hmm.
I also think there is a certain respect in the UK for uh, cases where people make something like a cooperative corporation. I remember that in the Basque region in Spain, for example, there are such cooperatives who are very advanced, even technologically advanced, and Mandragon, if I'm not mistaken, is the name. Maybe I don't pronounce it correctly, but there are a number of cases where cooperatives have somehow become a form that empowers citizens and allows them to have their own resources better distributed among them. So I'm given that in my country, I'm not really aware of successful large scale or even smaller scale initiatives of this type. I'm curious what you know about the culture, not obligatory only of corporations, but also of cooperations and culture of solidary um, business or solidary taken of decisions. Maybe it could be also expanded to culture of certain democratic initiatives like citizen assemblies, etc.
Hmm. It's not something like you. It's not something I know a great deal about. I know that when these bodies first started to appear, one of the guiding principles was that things had become too big. Uh, Supply chains had become too massive. Government had become too big. Uh, and that we need to return to uh, a system of smaller self-governing uh, bodies of citizens. Um, there's two sides to it. There's the sort of uh, local agricultural market, local artisan, uh, sort of village style cooperation uh, that I first became aware of during the 60s. It sort of grew out of the hippie era. There's that side of it, but I've also been reading about these sort of what would we call them, city zones that are becoming an increasingly visible phenomenon on an almost global scale. You know, emulating what or trying to emulate what took place in places like Singapore, Hong Kong to a lesser extent, where whereby local sort of local government and local business cooperate to create a system of governance and a system of trade that defies uh, or skews international global trade to its own advantage. Sort of a replica of the city states of medieval times. You know, whereby if you arrived at the gates of a city and you entered that city, you were entering a world that operated on its own basis, on its own terms. Uh, and yeah, this is an emerging phenomenon in the world as well. So so it seems to be operating at both ends of the income spectrum. Groups of billionaires living in particular areas are starting to create well, it's not just walled compounds surrounding their homes. It's sort of a walled cities, its own city state, working on its own terms. So you've got that at one end of the income spectrum, and then you've got these uh, very humble, very back to basics, very let's try to live off grid types of cooperatives working at the other end of the spectrum. Um, and I think both are strangely are driven by the same motives, the realization that there are dangers in relying on uh, the vast, complex economic system that we've created through neoliberalism, and there's a need to return to working, trying to produce as much as you can locally, or trying to depend on your own specializations within a region, whether it's agriculture, whether it's uh, banking, where it's trading in precious minerals, you know, and uh, in a way, what Donald Trump has been doing in recent weeks is another example of this. Uh, yeah, well, I mean, your question has prompted me to think about it, and it's something I haven't been thinking about. But yeah, yeah, there certainly is this emerging force in the world, and most particularly in the Western world.
This emerging force perhaps has many fathers or many reasons to appear, and I at least am tempted to make some parallel between end of socialism and what we or at least I may call a little bit maybe hurriedly end of liberalism or post-liberalism. Namely, it was the conservative forces that ended socialism, and we are now in a situation in which again it is the extreme right which is challenging the order. It is the force of change, if you wish. Some people have made comparisons to the rise of Trump and Musk with what Gramsci was speaking about cultural hegemony and the need for unprivileged, let's call them maybe in his term, original intellectuals or original leaders to appear from um, these communities which are subordinated to certain hegemony in their own view. Uh, Maybe a lot of comparisons and speculations are made. I don't mean to legitimize any of them, but I just noticed that uh, change in both cases, both to the end of socialism, was done with a certain agreement between the American conservatives and the people in Kremlin at that time, and it led to the appearance of conservative attitudes in Russian society or Soviet society, let's say post-Soviet, post-socialist society. And now we are again in a situation in which the force of change is the extreme right, or maybe it's, I don't know if it's exactly conservatism, but it's certainly a force which is again not so much pro-social. It's maybe more pro-business, and pro-libertarian, if you wish. Um, and there is certain claim that what Trump and Musk have been doing for the last months, the idea is to destroy, not really to even to build something or create something. Their mission, if I paraphrase Matsukato with her book Mission Economy, and claim that politicians should follow big projects and ambitious ideas. Their mission
Mm-hmm.
is to destroy. So now here in this context, as certain effort of, at least from my point of view, at dismantling what has been the basis of certain order takes place. I want to draw a little bit more attention again to our region, because there were many signs that something is not going the way it should have been going, at least from the liberal point of view, if we assume this point has been coherent and always relevant. I remind you of a book which you know very well. Ivan Krastev and Stephen Holmes wrote something like called "The Light That Failed,"
That's right, yes.
uh, and it was, as I understand, focused on why liberalism maybe achieved not so much as expected in Central and Southeastern Europe, and you have had your own path from the West to our region. You have been growing and developing together with this situation, the social environment here. Maybe uh, to returning to the issue of post-liberalism and the light that failed. Um, what is coming after liberalism, if I may ask? It's a very, again, general question, maybe difficult or easy, but I know a joke about socialism that the joke is, what is the worst thing of socialism? And the answer is, what comes after it?
Mm-hmm.
I am curious, do we see already certain contours, if there is such a word, or signs, sketches of what certain post-liberal philosophy, ruling philosophy, order, international order, post-liberal mindset uh, be, both in the West and in our region here?
Hmm. one of the central premises of the books, but The Light That Failed, was the fact that uh, the West, in a way, imposed a imitation imperative on those countries in southeastern Europe and the Baltic countries as well, uh, which they just about got away with until they lost their moral standing, and meaning that people like Orban and Putin could point and say, "Excuse me." uh, and also governments and populations in Bulgaria and Romania could start to say, you're telling us that we need to adopt your values and be like you if we are to raise our standards of living and to succeed. But what about the Iraq War? I mean, you lecture us about our attitudes to Roma minorities, you lecture us about this and lecture us about that, but uh, the flaws and the hypocrisy uh, behind many of the actions of the West are now blatantly obvious to us. So come on, you're not kidding us anymore. Uh, so, so what follows liberalism? Uh, I'm not sure if I got an answer. To be frank, Vladimir. Uh, many Western commentators are horrified, uh, even being obliged to contemplate such a question, because they see that liberalism, is an embodiment of Enlightenment values, uh, going back to the 16th, 17th century. It's the most, they would claim it's the most solid, humane philosophy that has been proven to exist. It's far from perfect, but if we were to set it aside and contemplate something else, we dread to think what this other thing might be. Uh, there are those claiming that in the very near future we're going to be living in societies that many ways will resemble the film The Matrix. Whereby artificial intelligence uh, will be making a lot of the decisions for us, whereby sophisticated machines and computers will be doing 80% of the labor, and many of the population, I mean, many of the work, those who currently work for a living will be rendered superfluous. So they imagine a sort of 1984 George Orwell situation, whereby the world is run by this dominant, this elite, uh, and everybody else are just fed the crumbs from the table and sort of kept happy and don't have to work really for a living and might be administered drugs and have implants in their brain that provide them with the contentment and the satisfaction that we currently obtain through developing social status and uh, having a circle of friends and working for a living and pursuing personal missions. The future is scary, and I really I have no conception of what I feel, what I can see what I want to see replacing liberalism. Maybe to be brutally frank, I don't have the imagination in the prevailing circumstances. Uh, it demands me to make to say to come up with very simple generalizations in a situation that's mind-bogglingly complex at the moment. I mean, I can imagine how I would love to fulfill my old age over the next 20, 30 years if I live that long. Uh, I have certain personal aspirations. I have aspirations for my family and friends. I have aspirations for the community I belong to. But how these can be achieved, and I have just no idea.
Okay. Again, I am also having my vantage point on these issues which we discuss, and I spoke already about hegemony. Um, Maybe I'm less able to imagine the social order in our societies, given that technology is disrupted and capitalism itself also influences. Um, there are perhaps always rising and falling economically and socially groups and people as well. Um, but if we focus on international order, um, there have been certain basic tendencies or principles, I guess, in modern times. Uh, I, I guess one of them is this division between people or forces who are more internationalist oriented and who are more nationalist oriented.
Mm-hmm.
I don't say that those who are nationalist oriented are not internationalists in themselves, because they, as we see in the European Parliament right now, there are four parliamentary groups of sovereignists. So people who claim to defend their national identity, conservative values, um, localness against globalism, they are also very good on international cooperation, but also a little bit ironically, everyone, given that there are four groups of sovereignists, everyone discovers the wheel by himself, because it turns out that sovereignists from Central Europe have different interests than sovereignists who are linked to Germany or France, for example.
That's true.
So
Yes. Mm-hmm.
every even sovereignism is both internationalized and localized and divided.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm more interested in internationalist people, um, because maybe that's my again profession and bias, but uh, from my point of view, for example, in the periphery, there is generally strong move for nations and for people to reproduce among themselves, to be protected against intervention from the outside. There is a term used by some experts on good governance about the countries in Eastern Europe or even Central Asia, impervious, I think is the word, impervious regimes, which are regimes or governments or models which are very difficult to be changed, in fact, to undergo change. And for me, that is again curious, because once again, my experience with Bulgarians, I have generally positive expectations, of course, from them, but I know that when you reproduce among yourself, among your close people, when the standards are not very much tested internationally, there is greater risk of failure. And I wouldn't like Bulgarians or other Romanians or other people to fail. I want more people, more nations, more groups of my region to be successful um, in terms of professional terms, emotional terms, etc. Any way of realization in life. I want us to be a success story. We shouldn't have the complex which maybe our societies might have had somewhere in the 90s, that there is a certain model in the West which we have to emulate, and we are not perfect, we are fallen, and we I think maybe one, maybe even potentially positive element of post-liberalism maybe could be that the center is not what it was. I mean, really, the center, like both USA and Western Europe, and that might not be obligatory something bad, uh, because maybe surprisingly, uh, now that is of course a speculation, but maybe some regions of the periphery develop with time the logic of the center, or discover certain abilities, resources, knowledge in their interior, which could make them a kind of center for certain region, for certain domain. Um, I can give a very visible example with the fact that Romania and Bulgaria were not in Schengen for a long time, even though they should have been, but there was certain political agreement that they are not admitted, so they were kept as some kind of an internal periphery in the EU. And just in the beginning of 2025, they were admitted to the completely admitted to the Schengen area. So now, in a moment when borders in the Western Europe are somehow um, again reinstated, because in various countries of Western Europe the Schengen system is put to test, and is somehow not being applied as it used to be. When USA again is bent on having this war with Mexico and uh, expelling migrants, in this situation, Romania and Bulgaria uh, eliminate the border controls between themselves, so they somehow are in a situation where they're more of the center. Center is, let's say, a territory where free flow, unrestrained flow of people, capital, etc., takes
I
place. So
understand what
that
you
the
mean. Yeah.
obstacle is eliminated. Also, curiously, Bulgaria and Romania have. Oh, I can also add Poland, and maybe in fact the whole region generally has had a lot of economic development. Let's say, at least in terms of GDP. So the incomes have been rising, salaries have been rising for the last years, and even foreign workers have been coming to Bulgaria, even, and Romania for the last few years, which again is something which was characteristical for Western Europe previously, and now more and more we are maybe somehow becoming like the center. Maybe not, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit or more, but there is some presence of elements which used to be in the center of capitalist system or European Union, and at the same time in the European Union or even USA there is seems to be certain fatigue of being borderless, of being opened. They are moving towards certain closure, certain distrust, greater distrust towards different people, the people who are different in terms of origins. Um, and I'm curious how you see this evolution, whether post-liberalism, for at least for our region, wouldn't be something like the paradox of a couple in which, with time, uh, somehow the roles become changed, if you understand, or switched. Somehow one element, one person in the couple moves and becomes a little bit more like the other, and the other becomes a little bit more like what the first person used to be. So
Hmm.
I'm curious if you see sense, if you see these things, and how you see them, in fact.
Gosh, yeah, I fully understand the point you're making. Uh-huh. When you ask me the question, how do I imagine, what do I imagine would follow liberalism? I suddenly thought of an experience I had when I was actually in the city of Edinburgh with a whole bunch of Bulgarian colleagues the very week before Scotland was about to make its vote on independence. And inevitably, my Bulgarian colleagues were pestering me for my feelings about the issue. And I didn't have a satisfactory answer to give them. I could say that maybe as a patriotic Scot, uh, maybe the Braveheart element in me was sympathetic to independence. I could be roused by the suggestion of independence, could be excited by the suggestion of independence. But the intelligent thinking part of me was thinking, this is just too goddamn complex to even contemplate the adjustments that will need to be made and the degrees of interdependence between Scotland and England and Scotland and the rest of the country, both in terms of government, in terms of financial structures, in terms of the banking system, in terms of all sorts. It just boggles my mind to even think about how to unravel this. Uh, so when you ask me about how I imagine post-liberalism will look like, uh, I balked at answering the question because I just can't imagine it because I am one of the many commentators who think that capitalism is broken. We need we need to replace liberalism in its current state. Although I am at heart a liberal, uh, but the sheer complexity just gives me a headache. Even just trying to think of simple things that I'd like to see in the future, things that I'd like to see ending, and things I'd like to see being enacted. But then I was listening to what you were just saying about how, yes, countries at the periphery uh, are in this sort of emergent process. As you say, Romania is a little bit ahead of Bulgaria, but Bulgaria is starting to catch up. Uh, in terms of economic development, in terms of meeting the first the Schengen criteria, uh, and it's as if the playing field is tilting ever so slightly. I agree with what you said about Western countries. There's this fatigue and this bewilderment and this fear and this realization that they're living in a broken system and that something has to give. But who has the imagination and who has the will to start this very complex process of unpicking current structures uh, and replacing them with structures that are fairer, more equitable, uh, kinder to larger proportions of the population. I mean, what you were talking about reminds me of something. My mother and father only ever visited. They're both dead now, but they only ever visited Bulgaria once. I remember my father was here. He was talking to a colleague of ours who was a professor from the university in Sofia, and he said simply to this man. My father said, "For goodness' sake, don't make the same mistakes that we made." Uh, which was more a statement of personal sentiment than the obvious answer would be, well, what mistakes? What are you talking about? But both my father, in expressing the sentiment, and my Bulgarian friend who was listening to him, sort of knew what my father was meaning. My father was saying, yes, improve your lot, join as a member of the European Union, westernized to an extent, put paid to values and practices you once had, but learn from the mistakes that we made in the past. Don't follow our imitation imperative. Use your discretion. Be aware that the streets of London are not paved with gold. Our system in the West is far from perfect. Select those bits of it that suit your national purposes, suit your regional purposes, that serve to benefit the Balkans, and then teach us a few lessons. Teach us to learn from past mistakes, and give us the courage again and the conviction to adjust what we do in the West.
What you say, the phrase "don't repeat our mistakes," um, I hope it doesn't sound a little bit nasty on my side, but that is somehow patronizing way of
Oh,
putting.
yes, yeah, I concede that. Yes, it is.
I want to challenge you with another question on what post-liberalism order in the world would be like. And I want again to discuss a little bit about hegemony and about the center, because um, maybe we are aware there was this claim that the crisis in the world, in the rule based order, was exemplified by Russia's intervention in Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe also by what Israel does to Palestinians in Gaza. But so there is this idea that the crisis of the center, which was supporting the rules in the world, leads to a situation in which Erdogan, Putin, Netanyahu, and others take law into their hands, and who has power imposes his will upon the weaker ones. Uh, Now, that is, of course, maybe even very visible. Maybe no need to argue about the fact that on the periphery of the West, the strong uh, military forces impose their will. But I don't think this is the only element of the, let's call it, post-liberal order. Um, I think, especially maybe in the European Union, but maybe also in general, um, I there is maybe also a parallel and even opposite process in which you can impose less and less on the other. Now, I agree that in certain areas of the world there is huge hegemony, very destructive. Uh, but again, uh, how can Bulgaria impose something on Romania, or Romania on Bulgaria? Uh, and even I can ask, how can Bulgaria impose something on North Macedonia? Because we, as Bulgarians and North Macedonians as well, know that there are some differences, some issues which um, create certain tension between the countries, but nobody seems to have the tools, the might, the allies, to really impose his will. And that is, of course, maybe a little bit dialectical, but I would say that just as there is certain fear, and we see that hegemony maybe rises, maybe hegemony will matter less and less, at least maybe in some areas in the world or in some relations. And I also think that a post-liberalism order maybe is not far from the idea that the center, there will be many centers. I know that especially Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has been considered a promoter of multipolar center. That is an issue maybe for another question, because usually multipolar world system means a system where the poles are certain empires, and I may return to that later. But I also have the feeling that more and more it's up to the people, paradoxically, even up to communities, where is the center. I don't know if you see it this way, I don't know if you agree, but there may be indeed a situation in which nobody can have the might to twist hands and to impose others to follow his will, to buy his products, to listen to his lectures. Um, we are more and more in a society where also people really can choose freely, and there are so many models in which you can grow in life, you can behave, many models of family or relationships, many models of activity. I know now I maybe sound very naive, like a liberal from some blind Western, or I don't know what Eastern country, but I really have the feeling this is also valid. The center is becoming decentralized. There are many centers, and hegemony, given that there are many centers, hegemony is less and less valid as an approach, and that means that we also have to develop as countries or as people or as communities models, approaches, skills, tools, maybe even to navigate a world in which nobody can be dominant on the other. We have to learn to communicate paradoxically as equals. We have to learn to do things together, etc., etc.
Hmm. I mean, in the West, one of the dominant reviews of how the world is changing is the realization that America is losing its ascendancy and may soon be supplanted by China. China will become the new economic and political superpower. But there are, like you said, there are also these emerging economies, other emerging economies uh, upon which we are highly dependent, primarily in the southern hemisphere, in India, Taiwan, South Korea, uh, and like you say, even in the context of Europe, it's as if the old centre, Germany, France, uh, primarily, are in a situation of constant crisis almost. Their industries are performing badly. They're heavily dependent on Russia for energy supplies. So you had this anomalous situation whereby the European Union was imposing uh, tariffs on Russia and confiscating Russian assets, but nevertheless, some of its main countries were spending more than the Russians were being deprived of because they needed sources of power from Russia. Um, so you've offered me food for thought, and I can see the the germs of truth in what you're saying about where maybe the old dominant center is starting to implode, and the bargaining power and the political competence and the progress, technological progress is now scattered more widely, uh, meaning that a wider range of countries now have considerable clout. Uh, it'd be nice to think that this will give rise to a situation whereby hegemony is obsolete as a concept and as an operating principle. Uh, I think it would require uh, a rejigging of the way we operate as a world. The reconstruction of our global economic structures, our global bases of agreement, uh, which have been heavily modelled from the old centre. Uh, so yes, I can see what you're suggesting, but again, I can't get my head, or I can't imagine how it will be facilitated. Uh, the, the pessimistic bit of my character thinks that this implosion of the old centre and this dissipation of power and influence could, at the start, be cause significant imbalance in the world, and a lot of feuding. But maybe, yeah, I can see maybe a happier situation emerging from it eventually, uh, simply because of the emergent need to compromise, and for those compromises not to be skewed in favour of the old centre of America and, for that matter, the European Union. So yes, Vladimir, I think there is something in what you're saying, but I just can't imagine how it's going to. I can't imagine how the world is going to be transfigured on this basis.
Okay, thank you for granting me validity of certain ideas I share. You ended with the European Union, and now that is something I promised I would return to, because there is this claim by some foreign policy analysts, including in Bulgaria, that post-liberal order means an order of empires in a way, or certain large blocks, which are, maybe I could name USA among them, Russia and China, of course, and perhaps even more, Israel is somehow aligned with Trump, and maybe also with Russia in this moment. Um, and in any case, there is this feeling that around Europe, the centers of power are those who are beyond Europe, and European Union especially is something like a indecisive, divided, um, weak element of the international system. This is usually the rhetoric of certain under tendency in among analysts. But if we consider more carefully the situation in Europe, maybe we will reach certain understanding that maybe European Union is also, in a certain way, a similar force, at least in the sense that it is a really big bloc. with hundreds of millions of people. Maybe its specifics or main difference is that it is a liberal, some say, empire. So that is especially for the left wing forces in the region or in Europe. There has been this discussion: should militarization of European Union be supported? Um, and some say that being left wing is, of course, being against wars, and militarization will inevitably lead to war. Um, Others say that without certain greater military power, European Union will never become truly autonomous, strategically autonomous, as it is called in the EU documents. And there has been this claim that EU has been leaving behind the umbrella, including the nuclear umbrella of the USA for a long time, making economy without investing in arms a lot or sufficiently. And now, when the USA seems to be redefining international order, the European Union, if it wants to be a big player or at least a player, should develop its own greater military industry, etc. So I guess you are familiar with all these discussions
Mhm,
and
mhm.
issues, but I'm curious now again from a liberal, in if you wish, liberal left, because I have the feeling you are also there, liberal left with certain social sensitivity. From a liberal left view, what would be the progressive uh, position, maybe not only geopolitically, but including geopolitically in, or even politically, in the world that comes? Because okay, I understand European Union is protecting a certain, putting emphasis on human rights, protecting democracy, while other countries are some, or regions or empires are somehow being illiberal, let's say, to be the least. But on the other hand, the logic of empire is again a logic of certain hegemony, and I wonder, could really democracy exist under an empire? There are again there is a school of thought that democracy can only be national, at national level. These are very big issues, and I don't want to really abstract with complexity. But I guess you find and see what is the dilemma. European Union perhaps has certain uh, positive role from the point of view of protection of, let's say, human rights, etc. It has it in its documents, it has it in its rhetorics of its leaders. But again, there are contradictions, and in a world of hegemony, in a world of military power, of control over information, including in a world of greater securitization, which we have been seeing in the last years, who is really this progressive ally? Maybe it's not a country, maybe it's not an empire, maybe the progressive forces should have some other form of support, which is not the one which I have been discussing until now.
Hmm. It was quite extraordinary how a lot of the saber rattling and a lot of the desire for sustained military support of the Ukraine came from Europe, while the Americans always seem to remain more skeptical. But nevertheless, a lot of commentators have pointed out that Europe were encouraging the the continuation of hostilities in the Ukraine. They were creating circumstances which didn't help to bring about getting Putin and Zelensky to sitting at the opposite ends of a negotiation table. But yet, the level of support from the practical support to Ukraine from the European countries was insufficient to allow the Ukraine to be victorious, to achieve its aims. So all that was happening was an elongation of the hostilities, postponement of negotiations, and I think this demonstrates that in terms of a power base, in terms of a, military force, Europe in NATO were encouraging the Ukraine, but also trying not to provoke Putin too far, not to push him into doing something that would force, that would precipitate the need for a NATO response. So yeah, Europe was in this extraordinary situation of supporting Ukraine but not supporting them sufficiently, of prolonging the hostilities, making war cries and but also recoiling from direct confrontation of Putin and Russia, which tells us that as an empire in the traditional sense, Europe doesn't really quite fit the bill. It hasn't the independent military capacity to defend itself. It fears provoking Russia, despite the fact that it was quite happy to support NATO expansion towards the Russian borders and to actually antagonize Putin in the period leading up to the Ukrainian crisis. So, as an empire standing independently, jettisoning its dependence on the USA, has Europe got, has the European Union got what it takes? I really don't know. In a way, I think Europe is very, very uncomfortable with its own history, with its own failings. I'm not just talking about Nazism and the Second World War. I'm not talking about the First World War. I'm talking about the experience of empires clashing on European soils. The memory of the memory of the Second World War is still with us. The memory of the First World War is failing, but the history books tell us about this constant strife in Europe over the centuries. And like I say, this is part of what provoked the attempt to form a European Union in the first place. That these things must not happen again. But as other forces and other pressures emerge in the world, I think the European Union has been found very wanting, and has tended to sit on its hands and not really devise a solid position on things that are on phenomena that are undermining its coherence and its unity and its progress. I mean, numerous factors like the issue of multiculturalism and mass immigration to the European continent that has been a destabilizing factor. The waning of European economies, national economies, the emergence of these nationalist leaders. I think if the world was to break into these what you've claimed to be empires, Europe would enter that situation with a certain timidity on the basis of its history, on the basis of not being able to see a means of setting the past, letting the past rest and being at peace with the past, and actually seeking to develop an entire new model for European governance and for if I could put it this way very simply, I think too much of the European dream of the European mission has been a response to the past, and insufficient attention has been paid to what the future holds, which is why we've not seen much of the grand mission that Mariana Mazzucato envisages in mission economy on a European scale. I think too much attention has been paid to mulling over the Europeans' recent and even in history over an even longer period, and there's this timidity, this trepidation in Europe. We don't seem to have the American swagger that comes from having never fought a land war, never, well, the slight exception of Japanese action at Pearl Harbor, but being a young country with an eye to the future. Europe's nations are ancient, many of them, with an eye to the past, and very little conception of how to face a very uncertain future.
Okay, I have a fast question and a slower question. I ask them both. The first question is, when you speak about Europe, is this including the UK or not? And the slower question, I mean, of course, the slower answer, perhaps, you have just described some issues or some aspects of how you see Europe's position in this post-liberal, as we call it, world. How is the UK comparing to Europe in this regard, these dimensions which you described?
One of the major differences between Britain and Europe is Britain's far larger affinity with the United States. Whereas that is not as pronounced in the other European countries in the European mainland, the European continent. Britain although it's been embroiled in the world in the two world wars fought in European territory, and although Britain endured German bombing raids, Britain has never been invaded since time immemorial. I think the last invasion of Britain was undertaken by the Normans and William the Conqueror in 1066. There are in Britain's constitution, and its rule of law, and its its view of liberty goes right back to the time of the Magna Carta. Britain's got this long, stable creation of tradition, whereby in mainland Europe traditions have come and gone; they've been shattered because of the friction between European nations and the clashes of empires. So yeah, Britain is aligned with Europe in many ways. Not only proximity, the Enlightenment sort of took place between Scotland. Edinburgh is said to be the seat of the Enlightenment in Britain and in the European continent. Strong affinity between France and Scotland, going back over centuries. Strong relationships between Europe and Scandinavian countries because of shared ancestry and long established trade links. But yet, in a way, Britain stands separate and has always looked eastward, across the Atlantic towards America. Never really fully understood why. Especially as America, in terms of multiculturalism, is probably a far greater success story than Britain. And many nationalities are prominent and well represented in America. Jews from Eastern Europe, the Irish, Italians, the large immigrant populations from South America. I'm never really able to work out quite why Britain has this strong affinity with America as opposed to Europe. Something I maybe need to delve into and study more thoroughly.
Okay, but how this strong tie to USA is seen now? Because we see now how Trump seems to be at odds with the Labour government in the
Mm-hmm.
mayor of London as well. And we see a UK political elite which seems to be cooperating with France and generally with Europe. The Weimar Triangle is being expanded
Mm-hmm.
and it supports Ukraine, while Trump has some more complex position on Ukraine and creates the
Mm-hmm.
impression that he is pro-Russian even, or his movement MAGA is pro-Russian. So you say, let's say, generally it's presumed that UK is pro-American, but we don't see it right now. How is this explained?
Well, I don't know. I mean, certainly Keir Starmer has been quite prominent uh, in grabbing the headlines in his cooperation with Macron and with the German politicians as well in his support for the Ukraine. He's been far more. He hasn't vacillated in his support for the Ukraine. He's been far less ambiguous than the Americans. I'm not entirely sure if Trump is entirely pro Putin, but I mean, I can't really account for Trump's seeming affinity with Putin. But I think nevertheless Britain is very heavily dependent on America as a trading partner. A lot of British goods and production go to America. And vice versa. American business is highly represented in Britain. Britain is a past powerhouse in manufacturing of vehicles and pharmaceuticals. You know, all sorts of British industries are heavily tied to America as well. And simply an established tradition, if you like, of being an American partner ever since the period immediately after the Second World War. So it's almost embedded in British modern culture now that we are a devotee of America. Although, like you say, we're now in a position where that position has to be radically reviewed, and I can see Starmer vacillating, not knowing what to do in retaliation to the tariffs imposed by Trump, saying that he's got a lot of respect for Trump and likes him as an individual, and still making gestures that are favourable towards the United States because he feels he's got no option. But nevertheless, showing solidarity with Europe on issues that are taking place in the European soil, and more specifically the Ukrainian crisis. So I think Starmer is sort of, as we say in the West, stuck between a rock and a hard place. He doesn't quite know which direction to go in. He doesn't quite know to what extent to stand up to Trump, whereas Macron or Carney, the new Prime Minister in Canada, are far more open and far more oppositional towards Trump. Starmer's playing a vacillating game. He doesn't quite know how to respond.
Okay, we are gradually moving towards the end of the discussion, and I want here to reiterate a question I formulated very timidly when speaking about European Empire. I try to ask uh, we have progressive forces in our region, in the West, in the world, and we have this rise of extreme right in many places around the world. We have uh, also the dismantling of liberal order, which Trump does, and that is also already seen in the fact that some of the leading media, for example, who were somehow supported through different ways by American government, had to find another solution so that they continue to exist, because certain money for them seemed to have been stopped or about to be stopped. And generally, progressive forces have been, at least in my region, in a weak or very weak position, perhaps because there was no geopolitical force to support them, or maybe because there is no economic base which also could support them strong in a stronger way. Um, we have seen in my region the rise of business, corporations, and oligarchs alike. And uh, in short, in this world which have been we have been advancing towards it for some time, and now it is already even speeded up to be created. Progressive forces need certain allies, certain social, economic, political, geopolitical base, maybe even. I'm curious. Uh, NGO sector maybe is one of the possible forces for such support. But again, um, the larger question is uh, who is interested in progressive forces in their rise, and on whom they can rely in these conditions in which we have I already mentioned, social base, economic base, political base, geopolitical base. Um, who are the allies of the progressives in these current conditions when even the USA somehow shrugs. If I paraphrase the phrase, Atlas shrugged by Ayn Rand.
Mm-hmm. Well, what was very encouraging is the sheer numbers who have been protesting in the streets in the USA. I mean, literally millions and millions and millions of ordinary people, uh, which might suggest that the opposition to what's taking place politically in the USA is now galvanizing, and many commentators have now said that, okay, it's difficult to predict just the level of damage Trump is going to do, but if somehow we can survive him, uh, only something good can emerge from it, because he and his like, we can call them the oligarchy, I don't know what to call them really, have shown their hand now. Their ambitions have been made blatantly obvious. They are causing considerable disruption to the political system, the public administration, universities, health system, the social welfare system, all aspects of social administration in America. But like you say, if we can survive the shock, we will be in a position where we are forced to review the weaknesses in those systems. We are forced to think very, very in a very incisive and critical way about the injustices that have prevailed for too long, primarily social inequality and the sheer hold that these oligarchs have had over the political elites in America, and to a lesser extent the United Kingdom. And it seems impossible to many commentators that Trump will return for a third term. He will be blocked. There's a possibility he may not last his current term. He may be supplanted. the forces of democracy are now galvanizing against them, and many commentators think that only something good can come from this. One, Trump or his likes won't be seen again, and two, the failings in the current system, we're being forced to face up to them and to take them very seriously, and maybe to come up with answers to the question you asked me: what follows liberalism in its current state, in its current manifestation? Will it be liberalism Mark II, with phenomena like minimum national income, as greater emphasis on welfare and supporting those who live in precarious circumstances? Who knows? But something needs to happen, and I think Trump has demonstrated the rot in the system. The very fact that someone like him could come to power shows the weakness of Western democracy in its current form. So there's a bit of me that's optimistic. There's another bit of me that's terrified what could happen in the world over the duration of Trump's term in office.
Okay, I asked you about um, the base on which progressive forces could step, and you directed my attention towards the USA and what is going on in their internal contradiction. Even some call it mild form of civil war in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm curious about something. Maybe that will be how our talk will end. Last time when we spoke, we had the occasion to discuss the idea of Bulgarian Romanian mini Schengen, and I remember a word which you used to describe as argument why the Bulgarian Romanian mini Schengen could be one uh, good idea. You said that it could mean greater self determination for the
Mm-hmm.
countries. Um, and uh, Now we have sovereignists who sound as if they try to reclaim some territory for the national country of Romania or other country in the region. But for me, at least, uh, in the context of what we discussed for the last 2 hours, um, a self-determination from progressive point of view should not be the replacement of one hegemony with another. So if I replace the hegemony of American corporations or of American oligarchs like Trump or other billionaires with some local Bulgarian or Romanian or other billionaire or influential company, that is still not changing a lot. It is replacement of one hegemony with the other. I'm curious, and I again reiterate my question now, but maybe in a better context for you to discuss. I'm curious what could be really self determination, what could it mean, what could it look like, and whether this current crisis of the center, which we also discussed both in the USA and in European Union, shouldn't create conditions or is not creating conditions really for self-determination, but not only in the sense of uh, replacement one hegemony with the other, but with a truly transformative self-determination. And I'm just curious, knowing your experience with people in my region and institutions and issues which arise in social domain. Um, Really, I repeat again, what could this self-determination look like, and how great are its chances? A progressive, let's call it, self-determination.
Hmm. One very encouraging recent phenomenon has been the significant street protests in Serbia, uh, ostensibly in opposition to the degree of perceived corruption in the Serbian government. We've seen similar phenomena in Bulgaria in recent years, although its impact is entirely questionable. If you look at the state of Bulgarian politics today, we've seen similar murmurings in Romania. Uh, there is this awakening and this energization, particularly among the younger generations here, uh, for a style of politics that, well, yes, inevitably is far less corrupt and far less in service to the oligarchy, uh, but also far more representative of the the spread and the diversity of society. Uh, uh, in the West, for instance, one of the issues that has been discussed for a long time is that the political systems have conspired to create sort of two party situations. You know, the liberals and GOP in the United States, Labour and Conservatives in Britain, but increasingly these parties have started to resemble each other, and there's very little to distinguish between the two. A lot of that's got to do with the phenomena that I mentioned at the start of our talk. So we're needing uh, a governmental system and a system of political representation that to put it in a very simple way, that's actually representative of what people think they're actually voting for. I mean, throughout Europe and throughout America, throughout the United Kingdom, the number of people actually voting has fallen drastically over a large number of years. I mean, there are certain flurries when it picks up again, but the level of disenchantment and with style of governance is fairly extreme. So you're talking about a progressive movement, but I see the movement as being more sort of mainstream, more and more of the population, as demonstrated by these street protests in the United States, and increasingly by street protests in the UK. The political system has got to wake up and start answering to the ordinary voter in the street instead of being in servience to the oligarchy and to corporate interest and to other things. So I think what we're seeing is an energization and an emergence of anger, disillusionment in the population, which for a long time was just simmering and was destructive, but now it's taking a constructive form, I think. And I think more and more we're going to be seeing loud and hopefully effective demands for changes in the way our countries are governed, both here in Bulgaria, Romania, Southeastern Europe, and in the West. But I see a lot of the energy being demonstrated more effectively here in Eastern Europe at this point in time. probably because of the lethargy and the tiredness and uh, the the hubris and the inability to conceive of what can happen. You know, in the West, we are timid about these things, but I think you here in Bulgaria and in Serbia and even in Moldova are demonstrating a style of political opposition that is more open, and it's something raw, and it's something energetic, and it's something almost heroic, which I just don't see in the West any longer.
Okay. For the last more than 2 hours, we have been trying to think about the world while being placed somehow in a certain periphery, at least geographically. And I have the feeling that really it's important that times are changing, but we'll be able to really feel and live uh, the change when we are able to name what exactly is changing and how much is changing and what in what way is being changed. So I would be happy if this talk with Mr. David Bisset really offers some ideas in this way, a contribution to a continuous and non-hegemonic talk and reflection on changing world. I know it sounds a little bit banal that times are a changing, as Bob Dylan was singing, um, and there is many people say that there is change going on in the world, but very rarely it is concretized what exactly has been changing. And in our case, socialism uh, or liberalism, uh, even if they are no longer supported in the way that they used to be supported some time ago by certain international entities as a body of ideas and practices and experience, they keep their validity, and it's important to be somehow reflecting and getting enriched by the uh, value and richness of these both ideas and practices and experience, even when they fail, or maybe even most when they are not succeeding to live to their promise. uh, I am once again thankful for this talk, David, and I hope we will
Thank you.
continue this format of communication. Uh, I expect you mentioned somewhere that you are considering what you do at the third yacht in which you enter. I'm in the second yacht, youth, I mean, age of being young. I would be happy if we have even more possibilities and occasions and podcasts, and keep thinking, really keep reflecting, keep uh, studying, and even also doubting our beliefs, um, because that's the truly amazing gift of humanity. So now I leave. I settle my case here. Let's say I did a number of challenges to you through this talk. I studied some ideas or interpretations I have. Uh, I may let you also say some words for ending, or we end however you choose.
Thank you, Vladimir. Yeah, I hope we can continue our talk. I mean, at times during the last couple of hours, I've been hesitant, I've been uncertain. Uh, but maybe through our discussions, a greater certainty, a vision will emerge. Uh, I come from the West, and I sometimes look towards Britain and towards Western Europe, where I've travelled and I've studied and I've got multiple relationships, uh, and I'm asking questions that I just can't answer. And I think it's because in the West everything's far more deeply embedded. Uh, Systems and ways of doing things and economic practices and social structures have been stable, although threatened, for generations. So it's difficult to imagine how the radical scope of change that is essential now can actually take place. Whereas constantly living here in the Balkans and looking at what's happening in Bulgaria and talking to young people, especially, communicating with friends and colleagues in the adjacent countries, I, I see the signs of a new way of doing things, and I see things that excite me and encourage me and fill me with hope. Uh, so yes, let's continue our discussions.
Okay. Uh, Thanks for to the listeners for paying attention to this discussion until that long. Um, Hope is, in my view, also finding ability to find common ground with the other, and in some ways, me and my partner in this discussion, David, are maybe very different, but I really felt that we had a common ground in this talk, and were reflecting uh, in a shared, mutual, and cooperative way. So I hope you have also enjoyed this talk.